Vladimir Putin agreed to a ceasefire immediately on energy and infrastructure,
right,
but not to a 30-day ceasefire. Tell us what happened.
Well, you have a situation where you have a lot of guns pointing at each other foolishly, because it would have never happened if I were president. That was not a war that was supposed to happen. Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers. They're nicely encircled, and that's not good. There are no Americans involved. There could be if you end up in World War III over this, which is so ridiculous. But, you know, strange things happen.
So we're going back to this understanding of President Trump's grand strategy. Mackinder warned of the power of having a land empire that stretches from Beijing all the way to Berlin. And as it turns out, that's exactly what happened at the end of the Cold War. The communists were given the entire landmass from Berlin to Beijing, and of course, capitaled in Moscow. That created the Cold War, which required the first Sino-Soviet split. That was Kissinger, and of course, executed by President Richard Nixon. Well, someone who certainly understands the history of that time and the geopolitical machinations of that time, and this is our next guest, political strategist Roger Stone. Roger, how are you?
Jack, great to be back with you, and my compliments on your analysis. It is exactly right. One of the great failures of Joe Biden and his foreign policy was to drive the Russians and the Chinese together. They are not natural allies. They have a long common border and a long history of distrust. In fact, at one point, Russian forces killed several 100,000 Chinese. We have managed to drive them together, and therein lies the great danger. So following in the steps of Nixon, who was a brilliant geopolitical strategist, Dr. Kissinger actually carrying out the grand plan of Richard Nixon, it's important to note that Nixon reaches out to China at a time that China is a dirt-poor agrarian society with no technology. Most Chinese don't have indoor plumbing. The rural areas of China do not have electricity. So they are not a danger to us in the 1970s. There is no way for President Nixon to see that 30 years later, Bill Clinton would give the Chinese most favored nation trading status, and at the same time, in a scandal for which he actually should have been impeached rather than the Lewinsky affair, he sells the Chinese our most secret missile targeting technology in the Loral scandal. It is those two acts that make China the danger it is to this country today, the wealthy and well-armed danger to America today. So your analysis is right on the money. Trump is now, I think, correctly on a course to try to drive a wedge between them. We have a common enemy with the Russians in radical Islam, for example. So I think Trump's strategy here is exactly right, and your analysis of it is right on the money.
We've been saying it here for weeks, and he mentions it very briefly in his interview last night with Laura Ingraham, talking about wanting to push China and Russia apart. And in fact, he says that China and Russia have been getting together since the Obama administration, and through these new policies that began to be pursued towards the end of his administration. Well, of course, 2014 is exactly that time. The Maidan Revolution was absolutely fomented and pushed and propagated by the Obama administration. And that is something that, of course, the Russians took as a direct impact on them. They saw it as the direct path towards a threat to Moscow. Victoria Nuland, of course, and Hillary Clinton and others at the time have said that that their eventual goal with all of this was regime change in Moscow. So if the Moscow views a threat from the West, what are they going to do? They're going to turn east. It's just as simple as that. And that's really been the situation since about 2014. And you can hear this, by the way, from the Russian side as well. Lavrov in his meetings, their foreign minister, he's discussed this as saying, look, we understand that President Trump wants an opening with us, but we have an issue because you guys change your presidents every 4 years, and sometimes you change your government every 2 years. So the bigger question for us is, how can we actually put together a situation where there's stability? And there's a piece out in Semaphore behind the scenes that there's some reporting coming out that the Russians are requesting assurances through legitimization at the United Nations to be able to get some of this in black letter law. So I do believe that peace is on the table. I think the Russians do want to work with us, and they do want to work with President Trump. But obviously, there are those considerations. But Roger, isn't peace the greatest prize of all? And I understand, I say this as someone of Polish descent. I understand there's all sorts of issues that we can always bring up. But wouldn't peace be the larger prize here?
There is no greater title that can be bestowed on a world leader than that of peacemaker. And the false narrative of the Biden-Obama left that this war is about the territorial ambitions of Vladimir Putin and the Russians just ignores history. We are in violation, once again, of the Budapest Memorandum, signed at the time that the Russians agreed to the reunification of East and West Germany, in which we agreed not to push Ukraine into NATO, which is really defined as not putting missiles aimed at Russia on Russia's border within Ukraine. It's not different than the situation in our country in 1962, when Nikita Khrushchev put Russian missiles 90 miles from our shore. And President Kennedy did not react well to that, nor did the American people. So this is reaffirmed again in the Minsk Accords, and we're in violation of both of those agreements. They don't seem to matter to the Biden administration. Victoria Nuland is the architect of this disaster. Yet there's one thing that can be said about the American left. It doesn't matter how discredited, disproved, or debunked any of their narratives are, just wait a few weeks and they'll be back recycling them yet again. We're right back to Russia, Russia, Russia. It's almost nonsensical.